Today I'm going to show you how I took my daughter's old clothes, chopped them up some more, and sewed them onto this hoodie to make a super cute patchwork quilted hoodie. Alright, so first things first, you're going to need a hoodie. I have a blue stain on this one because I was planning on doing an embroidery design on there, but I had taken it off anyways. You'll also need some clothes or material, fabric for the quilt that you'd like. I used my daughter's old clothes. Next, I cut out pieces of paper to use as a pattern guide for my quilt pieces. I made a middle square piece that was 4 1/4 inches and then based triangles off of that middle piece, making them 2 1/8 of an inch long on the bottom. I will have the pattern for those pieces, a downloadable pattern you can get on my website, megmadewithlove.com. So I first cut out the square piece, the square middle piece with my blue fabric here. I weighed it down with a measuring tape, if you're wondering why that's on there. And I just cut out a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch wider than the pattern piece because I want to have a little extra room around the edges whenever I'm sewing it onto the sweater. And I did the same thing with the triangle pieces. I cut out a little bit over the edge. I chose to cut out 2 triangles for every fabric choice that I had. I also decided that one layer of these fabrics did not match the thickness of the hoodie very well, so I decided to go with 2 layers. The back layer of each of the pieces, I chose to go with this thick thermal pink one that would strengthen each piece and not make it too thin or floppy, not matching the rest of the sweater. It might be helpful to play around with all the different colors because I had some extra choices that I wasn't sure if I was going to use or not, and just play around looking to see which ones work with each other well. And once you've got all your pieces cut, you're ready to move on to sewing the pieces onto the sweater. So first I grabbed my pattern piece that I had cut out from paper and I centered it onto my hoodie. My hoodie was kind of weird because the center of the hood was different than the center of the pocket. I think it was like sewed wonky. Then I grabbed a embroidery water soluble marker and I traced all the way around it. Next I took sewing pins and I'm going to place them on the sweater right on the line that I drew, that I traced with that marker. This is going to show you where the pieces will go on the other side, so you're basically needing those for a guide on the back side of your sweater. I do it on all 4 sides so that I have a guide to place the square piece on the other side. Alright, so you'll flip your sweater inside out to see the back side of your sweater, and you can see where I placed the pins along the edges of the square. You will take your square pieces, starting with the piece you want to be shown first and then the backing. Make sure you don't forget that so you're not getting the backing color. You're getting the actual color you'd like to be shown. And you will make sure that it lines up on all the sides so that you got some overhang on all of the pin sides so that you're not missing any of the fabric whenever you sew through all of the sweater and all the pieces. Next, I pinned them to the sweater with some more sewing pins. Just enough to tack it down and make sure that it's not shifting around whenever you sew. Alright, flip it back to the right side and you are ready to start your sewing. You'll grab a needle, and I grabbed some white embroidery floss. I thought that that would be a good choice of color to let the other colors shine because this was a close color to the gray. You will come in through the back with your needle. I came in just on the corner, and I decided to go with a split stitch, which is a stitch in embroidery where you come up through the middle of your stitches and it makes a nice solid line. I'm going to show you how to do that. I go maybe like a 1/4 of an inch away from where I pulled up the needle, go down back 1/4 an inch and pull your thread through. And to work that split stitch, now you're just going to come up through that stitch you just worked, splitting the embroidery floss in half and then pulling your thread through. Then you're going to do that again, going about 1 stitch length. I did about maybe like 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch long, and then come back up through the middle of that stitch you just worked with your needle, splitting that stitch and making it look nice and uniform whenever you're making a line. You're going to work all the way around that square until you get to the very end. Here I am at the end of my square, just working my last few stitches. And you can see on the back, my end of the thread had gotten caught in my stitching, which isn't very pretty, but it's whatever. I ended up tying the ends, my little straggler pieces. I didn't want them to come loose whenever I washed it, so I just tied a whole bunch of knots to secure them and made an extra little knot with my ends again. Took out my pins. And then cut the ends of my thread. At this point, it was my first time trying it, and so I really was wanting to try out cutting it after my first time sewing the first piece, and so I went after the big reveal whenever I was done with my first piece. To cut this, you could truly use a seam ripper so it's not so sketchy like I did, but these scissors were pretty sharp, and so I cut a little hole, and you got to be very careful, I will say, whenever you're doing this, so you're not cutting the back piece that you just sewed on, because that would be tragic and you'd have to start over. So cut very delicately, and you could see it peeping through. I was excited at this point. Cut very delicately along the very edge of your sewn line. I was low-key scared at this point to ruin it all, and so I was ever so delicately cutting. You'll cut all the way around the square with a sharp pair of scissors. That would be ideal because it's kind of hard to get into those edges and corners with some dual scissors. And it's so satisfying to see that back piece coming through. Like, man, I was excited about this. as you're cutting, you might see some extra straggler pieces along the edge, and I just cut and trimmed along as I went to make it look as good as I liked. And that could be like a style choice that you'd want to make. If you leave some extra fabric along the edge, it could be like a cute little shabby and tattered look that some people might be going for. So keep that in mind when you are cutting on how close you would like to keep it to that sewn edge. Alright, and here I'm finishing up the cutting of the sweatshirt portion off of my first piece. And honestly, I think it turned out really good. I was really happy with the results, and I went in, trimmed up the edges. I liked a nice, clean, close cut. And this is how it turned out. Ding! I was happy. Alright, next we're moving on to those triangles. Just like with the square, we're going to take our marker and we're going to trace around the edges. I wanted the edges to line up on the outsides, and I wanted to sew along the same edge that I was using for the square. So taking that into consideration, I put the triangle down a little bit to overlap on the sewn edge of the square, and I traced along the outside edge first, and matching those up with the edge of the square. That was the most important to me. And then doing the diagonal side, knowing that I'm going to sew along the line that's already there for this from the square. And I did the next triangle the same way, and you will continue to do that around the entire square, making 8 total triangles all the way around. So once you've got all your triangles traced, it's time to grab your first color that you'd like to work with. Don't forget your backing piece if you're choosing to do that with a thicker hoodie like I did. I chose this checkered piece of fabric along with that thermal piece, and I put the pins along the edges of the triangle just like I did with the square to use as a guide for the back side whenever I put the triangles actually onto the sweater on the back side. Putting that pin right on the line so that I know exactly where the triangle is that I'm going to be sewing onto. Turn the sweater inside out again. And this part is important. You are going to need to cut along the edges of the back side of your fabric, because I made this mistake. I did not cut close enough, and I ended up seeing the pink come through on the other side whenever I cut this next triangle. So you need to make sure that you cut closely to the seam, closer than I cut in this video, because I made a mistake and didn't cut close enough. And so I put that blue piece down first, just like on the other square. Make sure you're putting down the right piece first before you put the backing piece. And you're gonna line it up with the pins you placed on the other side, making sure that it overlaps a little bit. And you're gonna pin those triangle pieces to your sweater to stabilize while you sew. Just make double sure that you are getting the positioning right so that you don't have to try this again. You can take out those top pins because they are not of use anymore, and you'll grab your thread and needle again and get to work sewing along the edges of this triangle. I started with this edge of the square first. I didn't want the line to be too thick in between the square and the triangle, and so I decided to double up on those two. You might not want to do that, and that is actually probably going to make it easier if you don't do that, because it's kind of hard when the fabrics are butting up against each other to not have one of the fabrics show through whenever you cut the triangle, which I had a problem with. So just make sure, like I said before, to be cutting your fabric on the square close to the seam that you stitched. So you do that split stitch all the way around, just like I did, overlapping on the square, and it's time to cut again, ever so delicately, so you don't ruin that back piece. And cut a little hole first, and then cut around the edge right along the seam line that you sewed. So now you're seeing what I was talking about. My fabric was showing through that I had from the square, which was unfortunate, but honestly, once I cut it, you couldn't even tell that it was under there. I just snipped it away and couldn't even tell it was there. So if that happens to you, just don't worry, cut it away with your scissors and it's not a big deal. I just learned after that I needed to cut it closer. And I just touched it up a little bit more so that it wasn't visible. Snip. Goodbye. Goodbye. Looking better. There it is, all pretty and gone. The pink is all gone, dark blue, and it is looking so good. I'm happy with these two patterns and how they work together. And next I moved on to my green color with its backing piece, and just like before, you will sew all the triangles all the way around until you get back to the end, and then it's time to cut. After sewing on that next triangle, I decided I'd test it out again to see if I was gonna have that dang material showing through again on the square, and so I wanted to see if it would peek through again, and it ended up not showing on this triangle, which I was very happy about. And so after that, I felt very confident that I could just sew the rest of the triangles and then cut all of them away whenever I was done with them all. And I had a lot of fun actually cutting away the material. It was like so satisfying to get that new little pop of color. And here I am with all my split stitches all the way around, all the triangles. It's time to cut. But first, let me show you the back of my sweater, which you can see the backing pieces for all of the triangles and square. It isn't the most pretty work, but hey, I'm pretty happy with it. Now I get the honor to cut these beautiful triangles out. Chop and chop and chop. It's so fun. Hopefully you have as much fun as I did cutting all of these out. It's like the best part of the whole project. And there she is. Woo! That is one cute hoodie. I am so happy with it. And even better that it's made with my daughter's old clothes. Like, that's cool. I get to wear a little piece of her with me as I wear the sweatshirt.